So here we're going to give some instructions about how to make an outline of your biblical text, whether it's your Tower of Babel text in Genesis 11 or the prologue of John in John chapter 1. So determine the full extent of a literary unit is not something you actually need to do for any assignment in this course. But if you were, say, taking a course on the book of Jeremiah and you were asked, choose a literary unit in the book of Jeremiah, an oracle of the prophet, to write the paper on, you'd have to select what's the beginning and end of it. And that's something we could talk about another time. I'm going to skip down to this. How do you divide up a text into small sections and then group them into main sections? See, I'm going to use as my example a text from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 2. I've already determined that verses 4 to 13 is an oracle, and there are some reasons for that. I don't want to get into it right now. So suppose you had this text, hear the word of the Lord, you descendants of Jacob, all you clans of Israel. This is what the Lord says. What fault did your ancestors find in me that they strayed so far from me? It's a question followed by a statement. They followed worthless idols and became worthless themselves. They didn't ask, where is the Lord who brought us out of Egypt, who led us through the barren wilderness, through a land of deserts and ravines, a land of drought and utter darkness, a land where no one travels and no one lives. I brought you to a fertile land to eat its fruit and rich produce, but you came and defiled my land and made my inheritance detestable. The priests did not ask, where is the Lord? Those who deal with the law didn't know me. The leaders rebelled against me. The prophets prophesied by Baal, following worthless idols. Therefore I bring charges against you, again, declares the Lord, and I'll bring charges against your children's children. Cross over to the coast of Cyprus and look. Send to Kedar and observe closely. See if there's ever been anything like this. Has a nation ever changed its gods, yet they're not gods at all? But my people have exchanged their glorious God, that's the NIV, for worthless idols. Just said their glory, literally in Hebrew. Be appalled at this, you heavens, and shudder with great horror, declares the Lord. My people have committed 2 sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns, that cannot hold water. Okay, we have definitely a prophecy of judgment and accusation against Israel. Technically, the genre of this text is a covenant lawsuit. And the verb that occurs here, I will bring charges, is the verb reeve. I will accuse you. I'll bring charges against you. And a reeve is a lawsuit. This is a formal lawsuit where God is bringing a claim against Israel, saying you're guilty, and is giving the evidence for it. Now, there are 2 ways to divide up a text. I could look at the major units of this text and then divide it into subunits. But when I'm starting with the passage I don't know, it's easier to go bit by bit and divide it up into small units, and from there, group the small units into something larger. Okay? To illustrate how to divide up a text into small units, I'm going to use a drawing. So here is a little stick figure family. There are clearly 2 adults, some children, and an animal. All right? Suppose I were to ask you, how would you group these stick figures? That's like asking, how would you group the content of a biblical text according to what are the themes? And I could say, well, first of all, I could say, I'm going to look at those with skirts and those without skirts. So there are 2 with skirts. Let's say they're, by context, let's say they're probably female. And there are 3 humans without skirts. They're probably male. And there's an animal. It's one way to classify things. I could say, I could group them by size. There are 2 tall people, and there are a number of short people, and there's a little animal. I could also group them by hats. Here are 3 people with hats. This is a girl, a man, and a boy. 3 with hats, and then 2 without hats, and an animal with no hats. I could group them in terms of, one has a beard, nobody else has a beard. Okay? But one of the points that's important when you are analyzing a biblical text is where it says, make sure you've listed every verse of the passage in order. Don't rearrange the verses by topic. So in this case, if I was going to group things, I couldn't say, so say this is verse 1, this is verse 2, verse 3, verse 4, verse 5, verse 6. I can't say, well, verses 2 and 3, that's a unit, adults, or parents, possibly. Verses 1, 4, 1, 4 and 5, that's children. And verse 6, animal. I'll be taking them out of order. So if I was to follow in order, how could I do it? I could say, here we have ascending size, verses 1 and 2, then descending size, verses 3, 4, 5, and 6. Well, that would make sense. It doesn't tell me a lot of detail about it. I could, however, go this way and say, here we have one verse that's a literary unit in itself, because this is quite distinctive. A girl with a hat and a flower. There's no other person with a hat and a flower. That's verse 1. Then I could say verses 2 and 3, that's adults or parents. And verses 4 and 5, those are children without a flower. I could say that, without a flower in their hats. And then there's an animal. So I've got a literary unit, literary unit, literary unit, and literary unit. I could also say there's a fundamental distinction here between humans and then animals. So this could be a family of humans broken into a girl with a hat with a flower, parents, 2 children without flowers. In fact, these are 2 boys, even though one has long hair. It's unless that's a girl who's wearing pants. But we can't tell that just from this. We need to do some background analysis for that. So let's apply this sort of analysis to Jeremiah chapter 2. Okay? And this is how I've divided it up. I've looked at the first verse here, which is verse 4. God's people summoned to trial. Then I've got the next unit, verse 5. And clearly God is asking a question. Whereas here, he is, and then he makes a statement. He asks a question, then he makes a statement. So I have put it this way. God's pained question about their past relationship. What motivation for idolatry? That's very specific. I'll try to be as clear as I can. The Lord said, what fault did they find that they strayed so far from me? They followed worthless idols and became worthless themselves. So God is upset about something. And then I've taken verse 6, and the people forgot what God did for them in the Exodus and wilderness. And I noticed, because I know the pattern of the Old Testament, that you have the Exodus from bondage, the provision in the wilderness, and then the entry to the promised land. That's a journey they went on. We start with coming out of Egypt, and then we go through the wilderness, and then we go to the land. So they didn't ask, where is the Lord who brought us out of Egypt, who led us through the wilderness? And then there's a lot of explanation about the wilderness. Clearly, God took care of them in a difficult time. God did stuff for them, but they forgot God. They came to the land, which is wonderful. It's a gift. And they defiled it. They made it a detestable place by what they did in the land. Okay? And then we have various leaders. We have priests who didn't ask, where is the Lord? Just like the people. They didn't think about God. They forgot about God. Those who deal with the law, teachers of the law, perhaps scribes of some kind, didn't know me. The leaders, generic term, rebelled against me. And the prophets prophesied by false gods, by idols. So all forms of leadership failed. Right, the failings of Israel's leaders. And then now God brings formal charges, and I put applicable to present and future generations, because he said, I'll bring charges against you again, against your children's children. The present generation, that's you, and the future generations, that is the children's children. Right? And then cross over to Cyprus or to Kedar. Cyprus is in the Mediterranean Sea to the west of Israel. Kedar is in the wilderness, in the desert areas where Arab tribes live in the east. Go east or west. And no nation ever gives up their deities, whether it's Baal or Molech or Shammar or Marduk, whatever. They don't give up their gods, though they're not even gods. But you've exchanged your glory, and the NIV being a little bit on the form dynamic equivalent side of their glorious God. That's an interpretation. Their glory, which is God, but it's also their glory of living as God's image in the world. They've given up that for worthless idols. And then an appeal to the heavens as witnesses, because in these trials where God accuses Israel, he usually calls witnesses. Be appalled at this, you heavens, shudder with great horror. And the futility of Israel's sin. My people have committed 2 sins. They're really 2 sides of the same thing. One, they've forsaken me, the spring of living water. They have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. So I have put in a number of subheadings. I've tried to be as specific as I can. That's one of the criteria that I mentioned in Steps in Making a Good Outline. Give it a clear and accurate title, not too long, not too short. I try to come up with titles that explain the relationship between sections, put in verse references everywhere. So my titles try to explain the relationships between sections, how one thing leads to another. God summons the people, he asks a pain question, he accuses them that they forgot, they defile the land, even the leaders were no good, then he brings formal charges as a result. And then he says, as a further issue, even the pagans don't do what you do. And he appeals to the heavens, can you believe it? And he says, okay, these people have given up what's really useful. Me, I'm their useful God. I bring fertility and fruitfulness to their lives. They're giving me up for something that can't do anything. Idols are useless. So, I have a bunch of subtitles. Right now, my subtitles are all in bold italic, just to make them stand out. And I have put them all in sentence structure, capital at the beginning of the sentence, and God is capitalized, but the rest is not. New sentence here after a dash, what? But the rest is lowercase. Now, what would happen if I was to group some of this into larger subunits? And this is sort of what I would get. God summoned the people to trial. That's a major unit. And then a lament over the people's unfaithfulness. So listen up. I'm going to put you on trial. And I put that all in capital letters, except, of course, you don't put prepositions and conjunctions in capital letters to make it stand out from the subheadings, which I now have taken out of bold. They're just italics. And I've got a bullet point there. Okay. So God's lament over his people's unfaithfulness. I've got the subsections there. And having finished with the lament over their unfaithfulness, now he brings formal charges. Okay. I've got the future and present. I made that a major unit. And then God's astonishment over the people's sin, which involves the unparalleled nature of it, the appeal to the heavens, and the futility. So that's one way you can divide it up. That's just one way. This is an example of an embedded outline. I could have the outline separate, and then I could stick it in the text after, or I could develop it as I go along this way. But anyway, this is an example of an embedded outline, and I have a couple of other examples. Here is one. Genesis 15 is an example. The question of offspring and the question of land. They're both questions because Abraham asked God two questions. Each time God responds, Abraham speaks back, and at the end Abraham believes. But after the question of land, there is no reference to Abraham believing. It ends open-endedly. So my outline already is an interpretation. And I could take a look at Psalm 30, which I've organized around thanksgiving for rescue, the story summarized, and I've broken that down into invitation to the community to join in thanksgiving, then the story expanded. Orientation, things going well. Disorientation, things going badly, and lament. New orientation, transformation. Those are examples of embedded outlines, and for your next assignment, I'm looking for your embedded outline with a relatively literal translation, like the NIV or the NRSV, not a dynamic equivalence translation, please. And I'm asking for you to put your biblical text with your outline embedded in it, and then you organize it in a way that looks clear. So I say that you might use numbering, bullets, indents, if it helps make your outline clear. I didn't use any numbering. You don't need numbering for a 1 or 2 page short outline of a passage. You can adjust the margins and spacings and so on, but don't overdo it. And if you've done a good outline, Gorman says your work is nearly half over. I think your work is more than half over. All right? That's how you make a good outline. We can talk about this in our Zoom meeting.